There is a photo that was taken just days before everything happened. 9 hikers standing in the snow, smiling, relaxed, young. If you saw it without context, you do think it was just another winter expedition. But what makes the image disturbing is that every single person in that photograph could be dead within days. And the way they were found, it still doesn't make sense. What I'm about to tell you is real. This happened in the winter of 1959, deep inside the Ural Mountains of what was then the Soviet Union. And even now, decades later, people still argue over what terrified these experienced hikers so badly that they ripped their tent open from the inside and ran half naked into a frozen wilderness in the middle of the night. Some people think it was an avalanche, others think military experiment. Some think something far worse was waiting outside that tent, but the deeper you go into this case, the less human it starts to feel. This started in a hiking expedition, pretty normal at first. The group was made up of experienced hikers and ski trekkers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute in the Soviet Union. Most of them were in their early 20s, smart, athletic, used to harsh conditions. The leader of this expedition was Dyatlov, quiet, intelligent, extremely experienced. The trip itself had a goal: reach a mountain called Oton Mountain. The route was considered dangerous enough to earn the highest certification level for winter trekking, which meant people knew exactly what they were doing. That part is important because beginners panic. These people don't, or at least they shouldn't have. Before leaving, the group sent cheerful messages back home. Jokes, photos, little diary entries. Nothing felt wrong. One member of the group, Yudin, actually turned back early because of health problems. Back pain. He said goodbye to the others and returned home. That decision saved his life. For years afterward, he could carry the guilt of being the only one who survived. The group continued deeper into the mountains, and at first, everything seemed fine. They skied through the brutal weather, set up camps, took photographs, laughed, sang songs. One image shows them marching through endless snow, while the wind bends against them like invisible hands trying to push them back. Then, they reached the eastern slope of a mountain called Kolosaiko. The name comes from the indigenous Mansi people, and depending on the translation, it means something close to Mountain of the Dead. Yeah, not exactly comforting. Still, experienced hikers couldn't care about local legends. Snow is snow, a mountain is a mountain, and at least that's probably what they thought. On February 1st, 1959, they set up their tent on the slope, and that decision could become one of the biggest mysteries in modern history. At first, investigators thought maybe the weather trapped them. Simple, straightforward, but then they found the tent and everything changed. Such thing didn't even begin looking immediately. The hikers were expected to return later, but delays weren't unusual for expedition like this. Still, days passed, no messages, nothing. Families started getting worried. Search parties were eventually sent into the mountains. Volunteers, students, military personnel, and when they finally found the campsite, the entire atmosphere changed. The tent was still standing, partially buried in snow, but something was horribly wrong. The tent had been cut open from the inside, not unzipped, splashed, like the people inside were desperate to get out immediately, and the footprints leading away from the tent. We are barefoot or wearing only socks in freezing temperature. Imagine that for a second. You are an experienced survivalist. You are in zero conditions, and somehow something scares you so badly that you run out half-dressed into the darkness. Not one person, all of them together. That's not a normal panic, that's a terror. Investigators followed the footprints down the slope. About a mile away, near the edge of a forest, they found the first bodies. Two men, Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Kruvoshenko. Both were barefoot. Both were wearing almost nothing despite the freezing cold, and beneath a cedar tree nearby. There were signs they had tried to make a fire. Branches high above the tree were broken, as if someone had climbed up in panic, trying to look for something or someone. But what really disturbed investigators was the condition of the bodies. Their hands were torn and damaged, like they had crawled at back with frozen fingers, trying desperately to climb higher. Then they found another body, It was Dyatlov himself, lying in the snow, positioned as if he had been crawling back towards the tent before collapsing. Then two more, also seemingly trying to return. It looked like they had escaped something, and then tried to go back once whatever scared them was gone. But they never made it. At that point, the official explanation seemed obvious. Hypothermia, exposure, case closed. Except the remaining bodies hadn't been found yet, and when they were finally were, the case became horrifying. Months later, after snow melted deeper into the ravine nearby, searchers discovered the last 4 bodies, and these bodies were different, very different. They weren't lying exposed like the others. They were buried under a snow in a ravine, and some of them had catastrophic injuries. One woman, Ludmila Dubinina, was missing her tongue. Part of her lips were gone too. Another victim had massive chest trauma. One had a fractured skull. The force of the injuries was described as comparable to a car crash. But here's the disturbing part. There was almost no external wounds, no major cuts, no obvious sign of a violent attack. It was as if enormous pressure had crushed them internally. One investigator reportedly said the injuries looked like they were caused by a very powerful force. And then there was something even stranger. Some of the clothing tested positive for radiation. Radiation? Out in the middle of nowhere, on hikers. At this point, the theories exploded. People started whispering about secret Soviet weapon testing. Maybe military experiments, maybe airborne mines, maybe radiation exposure from classified technology. Others believed something unknown attacked them, because none of it felt logically anymore. Why leave the tent like that? Why no proper clothing? Why separate into groups? Why the violent injuries? Why the missing tongue? And then witnesses nearby reported seeing strange glowing orange sphere in the sky around the same time. That detail pushed the story into something almost supernatural. Even experienced investigators become unsettled. The Soviet government eventually closed the case with a bizarre conclusion. The hikers died due to a compelling natural force. That was the official wording. A compelling natural force? What does that even mean? No proper explanation, no real answer, just sealed files and silence. And for decades, people obsessed over what happened up there. One theory says it was an avalanche. Simple enough, the hikers heard snow shifting. They panicked, cut their way out of the tent quickly, run downhill, freeze to death. But there was a problem with that. A lot of problems. First, the slope where they camped wasn't steep enough, according to many experts. Second, the tent was still partially standing, not crushed. Third, why would experienced hikers stay away from the tent for so long after escaping danger? And why were some bodies found much farther away with those brutal injuries? Another theory involves infrasound. This one is weird. The idea is that wind moving around the mountain created a low-frequency sound waves that caused psychological panic, extreme fear, disorientation, maybe even hallucinations. So the hikers suddenly felt overwhelming terror and fled irrationally. Sounds interesting, but again, it doesn't explain the injuries, or the radiation, or the missing tongue. Then there is a military theory, and honestly, this is where things start feeling darker. Remember, this was the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Secret testing absolutely happened. Some researchers believe the hikers accidentally warded near classified parachute mine tests. These devices explode above the ground and create intense temperature waves that could explain internal injuries without external damage. It could also explain the glowing lights in the sky, and if the hikers witnessed something secret, maybe authorities covered it up. But even that theory has holes, because why were they scattered like that? Why were some seemingly calm enough to attempt survival tactics? Why no evidence of explosives? And then there are the stranger theories. People blamed the indigenous Mansi tribes at first, but investigators found no evidence of attack, no struggle, no foreign footprints. Besides, the Mansi people reportedly considered the area sacred and avoided it. Some people think it was a creature, something inhuman roaming the mountains. Others think the hikers encountered something psychological, something that broke them mentally. And honestly, when you look at the final photographs from their cameras, there is one image people still argue about a blood-dark figure standing in the snow, far away, almost human-shaped. Maybe it's just one of the hikers, probably, but in the context of everything else, it feels wrong. One detail always sticks with me. When rescuers examined the skin, they realized some of the hikers had removed clothing from the dead to wear themselves. That means at some point, they understood they were dying. Imagine the cold, the wind streaming through the trees, pitch black darkness, friends collapsing one by one, and somewhere behind you, that time sitting alone on the mountain. Whatever happened that night had to be terrifying enough that returning to the shelter felt worse than freezing to death. Think about that. Human beings will endure unbelievable conditions to survive. People crawl through wreckage, jump into frozen water, walk on broken bones. Survival instinct is powerful, but these hikers abandoned their only protection. That means in that moment, the danger outside the tent felt safer than whatever they believed was happening inside or around it. And that thought is horrifying. Years later, investigators reopened the case. New studies, modern forensic analysis, fresh theories. In 2020, Russian authorities announced they believe an avalanche was responsible after all, but not everyone accepted it. Independent researchers still argue over inconsistencies, and survivors' families were frustrated because after the case, it still felt incomplete. Even now, the Dyatlov Pass incident remains one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries in the modern history, not because people died in the snow. That happens. Nature is brutal. What makes this case terrifying is the behavior, the panic, the impossible decisions. It feels like there is a missing piece, a moment in that tent nobody can explain. A sound, a sight, a realization, something that hit all 9 of them at once, something so terrifying. They tore their way into the frozen darkness, and whatever it was, they never escaped it. Sometimes I think about the last moment before they fled. Maybe someone woke them up suddenly. Maybe they heard something outside, heavy footsteps in snow, a low distant roar. Maybe light flooded through the tent fabric, orange, moving, silent. Or maybe it was something completely ordinary that spread into chaos. Fear can spread fast in isolated groups. One person panics, then another, and suddenly, rational thought disappears. But still, those injuries, that missing tongue, the radiation, the light in the sky, the classified files, it all hangs there like unfinished sentences, and the mountains kept their secret. There's another thing people rarely talk about, the final entries in the hiker journals. They were cheerful, normal. One of them joked about the cold, another wrote about singing songs together. There was no sign that they felt doomed, no fear, no sense that something terrible was waiting for them, which somehow makes it worse, because horror is always darker when it arrives suddenly. One moment you are laughing with friends, the next you are running barefoot into the dark. The family spent years searching for answers. Some died, never knowing what truly happened, and over time the story became legend. Books, films, theories, endless debates. But behind all that, we are real people, young students who thought they were going on an adventure, and somewhere in the freezing silence of those mountains, their final moments became one of the most chilling mysteries ever recorded. There is a reason this case still haunts people, because deep down everyone imagined themselves in that tent. You wake up suddenly, everyone around you is panicking, the wind outside is streaming, someone cuts through the fabric, people are shouting, and then you run. No coats, no boots, no time, just raw fear, into darkness so cold it burns your lungs, and whatever scared you is still somewhere behind you. The mountains where it happened still exist, cold, silent, empty. Tourists visit sometimes, researchers too. People stand there trying to imagine that night, but the snow covers everything eventually. That's the unsettling thing about the remote places. They erase evidence, they swallow sound, and if something terrible happens out there, the wilderness kept it. Maybe that's why this case refuses to die, because no explanation fully fits. Every answer leaves behind another question, and maybe the scariest possibility is that the hikers understood what was happening for a brief moment before they died. Maybe they saw it clearly. Maybe they knew exactly why they had to leave the tent, but whatever knowledge they carried into that darkness never came back down the mountain with them. And to this day, if you ask people what happened to Dyatlov Pass, you will get a different answer every time. Avalanche, military testing, psychological panic, something inhuman, something we still don't understand. But no matter which theory you choose, those final footprints remain real, barefoot in snow, leading away from safety into darkness and stopping